Shalom. First off, I want to start off by giving all praises, honor, and glory to the Most High God, your name Yahweh. In the name of Yahweh Shah, who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ. In the name of the Rakakwadash, which is the Holy Spirit that comforts and guides us, especially during these perilous times to come. I also want to give a double honor to our apostles and elders, a great millstone who teach and rule well with truth and sincerity, and peace and salutations to the elect. As always, these internet epistles and us being out on the highways and the byways, the streets preaching, is more so geared towards the Lord's chosen people. You Israelites today consisting of you so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, and Israelite foreigners that may look like heathen but are not heathen because your father's seed line traces back to one of the 12 agendas of the 12 tribes of Israel that's written in my bio. But even more so than that, it's geared towards the elect out of the nation of Israel, the small remnant, the chosen of the chosen, the ones that's actually going to repent. Basically turn back and seek the Lord in obedience for salvation. As far as when you heathen, you're going to learn about your judgment to come and what is going to be in the kingdom of heaven, ultimately being under subjection to the Israelites. But through the Spirit, I was just thinking about how the fact that certain things, certain products, that it requires a certain amount of power to operate. And it just made me think about the fact of the matter is that, as we know, the ones in power right now, Esau Edom, the so-called white man, is basically the basis of men. He's the smallest, basically the least of the heathen, so to speak, and he's in power. And like I said, ultimately he has too much power to the point that he's going to end up malfunction because ultimately they don't know how to handle the power. To the point is eventually, if the Lord was to allow them to be able to rule forever, then they will self-destruct. Matter of fact, what's that? Matthew 24 and verse 22. It says, "And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened." So yeah, the Lord has to shorten the days for the elect's sake. Because like I said, if the Lord allowed these devils to rule past, a certain amount of point of time, like I said, that be able to continue on, then it will be no flesh to be saved. Because they constantly do things to pollute and basically damage the earth. To the point that, like I said, they got too much power that they're not able to handle. So the Lord ultimately limited their time and power for a reason. Matter of fact, let me grab that before I get into the ChatGPT. It says, Job 14 and verse 5, it says, "Seeing his days are determined, the numbers of his months are with thee." It says, "Thou hast appointed his bounds that he cannot pass." So yeah, the Lord has set a boundary for how long these devils are going to be able to rule. Of course, we don't know the exact day or time because only the Heavenly Father, Yahweh, has the power to know these things. But as we know, according to the scriptures, we were given signs, and we can tell based on what's going on in these times that it's getting close before to this devil to be moved out of power. But I had just, since I was thinking about it, I just ChatGPT. I said, what happens when a certain equipment receives too much power than it can handle? It says when a piece of equipment receives more electrical power than it's designed to handle, several things can happen, depending on the severity and duration of the overload. It says overheating, excess power usually turns into excess heat. Components like wires, circuits, or motors can heat up quickly and may cause performance issues. And we can see that these devils is ultimately having performance issues. Their wisdom, they're lacking the wisdom that they were portrayed to have. and starting to look more and more foolish as the times go on. You know, I'm going to grab that in Jeremiah chapter 49 and verse 7. It says concerning Edom, Edom, Esau, Edom. It says, thus said the Lord of hosts, is wisdom no more in Teman? Is counsel perished from the prudent? Is their wisdom vanished? So yeah, the Lord is saying, is there any more wisdom in Teman? Like I said, even the average person is looking like the moves that these devils is making is foolish. And we clearly see, all in all, that they don't give a damn about the people, especially you Americans, because ultimately we know that these devils are doing the bidding of the elites, Basically, all in all, they're doing the bidding of Satan. But the elites is trying to forward their agenda, the New World Order. They don't care about the agenda of the people. They want to continue to increase their riches and basically have, slaves, servants. They ultimately want to continue to keep the Lord's people, of course, at the bottom. If they could, they want to do away with the Lord's people, because of the fact of the matter is, as the scriptures speak on in Genesis, the 27th chapter, I believe, it talks about how when Esau sold his birthright, he said when the time of the mourning of his fathers at an end, he's going to slay his brother. And these devils still have that mindset to this day. So for you people to believe that, oh, this is new times. There's no such thing as, hate or things like that. The scriptures talk about how they will have a perpetual hatred for the Lord's people. Ezekiel 35 and verse 5, it says, because thou hast had a perpetual hatred and hast shed the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword in the time of their calamity, in the time of their iniquity, at an end. Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord Yahweh, I will prepare thee unto blood, and blood shall pursue thee. See if thou hast hated blood, even blood shall pursue thee. And that's why we constantly see that these devils are constantly at war, because the Lord has it out for them because of the wickedness that they've done unto the apple of his eye. Just like the Lord said in, I believe, Zechariah, the first chapter, starting around the 14th verse, he said, basically, he was a little displeased about his people, but these devils done did too much. But I'm going to go back to it says, excessive power usually turns into excessive heat. And we know that eventually the missiles are going to fly. And it's going to be a lot of heat. It talks about, scriptures talk about that lake of fire, World War III. That's ultimately the climax of this kingdom of heaven after the MOTB, is made mandatory, which is the RFID micro C-HIP. It says, to damage to internal components, sensitive parts like integrate circuits, capacitors, or transistors that can fail if voltage or current exceeds their limits. This can be immediate or gradual. Yeah. And this kingdom is gradually falling apart, as we can see as the times go on. Internally and externally, Like I said, it's problems within Babylon the Great, which is America, spiritually Sodom and Egypt. And then they having problems on the outside. I'm going to get Mark 3 and start at verse 23. It says, and he called them unto him and said unto them in parables, how can Satan cast out Satan? And if a kingdom be divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And we know that America, Babylon the Great, has been divided, since since the beginning. The Democratic and the Republican Party. And then we got, tensions rising up between America, and the NATO and the EU, because them over there in Europe, they're struggling based on the situations that's happening, with the Strait of Hormuz, the lack of, having the energy, the resources, due to that. So eventually, like it's written in Revelation, the 17th chapter, I believe around the 15th verse, it talks about how the beast shall hate the whole. It says, and if a house be divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And if Satan rise up against himself and be divided, he cannot stand but have an end. Yeah, so Satan rise up against himself. And just like, as we know, it's tension between, America along with the Russians too, and those are Edomites as well. These devils have a history of, fighting against each other, just like during the time of, what's that, the Maccabees, basically during the Greek Empire, after Alexander the Great died, and he split basically he split it up to his four generals, Ptolemy, Seleucus, Lysimaeus, and Cassandra. It says evils were multiplied in the earth. But yeah, like I said, if these devils continue to be in power, they can't handle it, and they end up destroying themselves, self-destruction. Insulation failures or melting in wiring or power supplies. Insulations can melt or break and potentially lead into short circuit. Yeah. The protection eventually fails. Blown fuses or trip breakers. Many systems are designed with safety devices that intentionally cut off power when overload is detected to prevent further damage or fire. And that's the thing, these devils, they stretch themselves too thin, just like, the ancient Roman Empire. As we know, America is the revival of the ancient Roman Empire. We see the repeat of the mistakes, that was made back then, and they repeat those things in these times, Like I said, with the military, they stretch themselves thin, all up in other, nations matters. It just reminds me of Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 3. It says, I'm going to start at verse 3. It says, for the vision, as we know, prophecies is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, but because it will surely come, it will not tarry. Behold, his soul which is lifted up in it is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. It says, yeah, also because he transgressed by wine, he is a proud man, neither keepeth at home. Yeah, neither keep at home. Like I said, always in other, people's matters. It says, who enlargeth his desire is hell, and is as death, and cannot be satisfied. They can't be satisfied, Like I said, try to heap up everybody's resources because they can't be satisfied, They're constantly looking for the next thing to take, to the point that tensions continue to rise between them and everyone else. But that's because, like I said, what could you expect? They're the bases of men. The Lord has set these devils up to be that way. Their blessing was the sword, so they use that sword to this day to try to get everything that they want. But we understand that blessing that had the fatness of the earth was only for a temporal time. It says, and as his death it cannot be satisfied, but gather unto him all nations and heapeth unto himself all people. Shall not all these take a parable against him, and taunting proverb against him, and say, woe to him that increaseth that which is not his? How long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay. And we know that thick clay represents, debt. And we know that America is in a large amount of debt, just like one of my other videos was speaking on the fact of how the America's debt is at 100% of its GDP. Let me see. Oh yeah. So because it was saying what it says. Many systems are designed with a safety devices. Yeah, and they don't have that safety device. They don't have the mindset of knowing when it is when enough is enough. It's time to stop. They're gonna keep going because the Lord is putting the spirit of has the proud spirit on these devils. What's that? Jeremiah 49 and verse 20. Because we know that the Amalekites, the tribe of Amalek, basically the small head, big nose that's in our land claiming to be the Lord's people, they're not going to stop. They're an extension of America, It says, Jeremiah 49 and 20 says, therefore hear the counsel of the Lord that he have taken against Edom, and his purpose that he have purpose against the inhabitants of Teman. Surely the least of the flock should draw them out. And we know the least of the flock is the Amalekites. The small head, big noses, like I said, in our land, Israel. It says, surely he shall make their habitation desolate with them. So they don't have the concept of knowing when to stop. Just like as we know, America has the ceasefire, going on. But like brother's been saying, basically all they doing is taking a break so that they can, replenish themselves to get right back at it. But I'm going to go for number 6. It says 5 risk in extreme cases. If protective systems fail or are absent, excessive heat can ignite surrounding materials. And we know, all in all, that fire is going to come. But the heat is basically building up. The tension is basically building up. The Lord has an appointed time for these things to happen. Revelation 18 and 5, it says, for her sins have reached unto heaven, and the Most High have remembered her iniquities. Yeah, the Lord is allowing these devils to build up a tab. It says, reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her a double according to her works. And the cup which she have filled to her double. How much she have glorified herself and lived deliciously. So much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. And that's the mindset. These devils believe that they're going to continue on. It says, therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord power who judgeth her. And that's the will of Yahweh Shem Yahushua. That's the judgment that's going to come upon this queendom. Because like I said, those that are in power right now are not equipped to handle this much power for that long. It says, in short, equipment is only built to handle a certain safe operating range. Going beyond it stresses the system and protection mechanism, and present try to shut things down before damage becomes dangerous. Yeah, and they're not going to stop. Like I said, they're going to continue to go until they be destroyed, because the Lord is putting it on their minds to do so. I'm going to grab Ecclesiastes chapter 14, and I'm going to start at verse 3. It says, riches are not come before niggard. Yeah, Esau, Edom are the true niggers of the earth. And what shall an envious man do with money? He that gathereth by defrauding his own soul gathereth it for others, that should spend his goods righteously. He that is evil to himself, to whom will he be good? He should not take pleasure in his goods. There is none worse than a man than he that envieth himself, and that is his recompense for wickedness. And if he doeth good, he doeth it unwillingly, and at the last he will declare his wickedness. Yeah, because these devils are acting like they act as if they're trying to, do you a favor, and then they'll turn around and stab you in the back. It says, the envious man have a wicked eye, he turneth away his face and despiseth men. A covetous man eye is not satisfied with his portion, and we can clearly see that America isn't satisfied with his portion. It's all, you know, coming out. People saying it. We seen what happened with the Venezuela situation. We seen what happened with Iraq when they claimed that they had weapons of mass destruction when we knew that found out that was a lie. And so forth and so on. Whatever that verse 9 says, the covetous man eye is not satisfied with his portion, and the iniquity of the wicked drive up his soul. Yeah, a wicked eye envious his bread, and he is a nigger at the table. It's just describing exactly who these devils are. But I'm going to go from there to Ecclesiasticus. And I'm going to start at verse 3. It says, an unwise king destroyeth his people. Yeah, these devils are unwise. And as we can see, it was meant for them to be unwise, because the law, statutes, commandments, which were given to the Israelites to show forth our wisdom to the nations, were not given to the heathen to have. It says, but through the prudence of them which are in authority, the city shall be inhabited. It says, the power of the earth is in the hands of the Lord, and in the due time he will set over it one that is profitable. So the ones that's able to truly handle that much power, the power of basically governing the whole earth, will be set over it in due time. But I'm going to jump down to verse 8. It says, because unrighteous dealings, injuries, and riches got by deceit. And as we know, America was built off of those of those things. It says the kingdom is translated from one people to another. And that's going to happen in due time. But like I said, the point of the lesson is these devils are not able to handle as much power as that's been given to them. So it was bound for them to basically self-destruct. Daniel 4, and I'm going to finish off in verse 17. It says, this matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the bases of men. So yeah, the Lord has set up the bases of men to be in power for this season. And we know eventually that's going to come to an end, because it wasn't, like I said, meant for them to be able to have this much power to rule forever. That's meant for the Israelites, the kingdom of heaven, which will be on earth as it is in heaven. But Lord willing, this is edifying. Call Elohim La Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahweh Shai Ba'Shem Kakwadash. Double honors to our apostles and elders. A great millstone to teach them well with truth and sincerity, and peace and salutations to the elect. Shalom.